Welcome. Tonight's program will dive deep into fringe knowledge of lost, hidden, and suppressed truths about the nature of our reality. The decoding process can be uncomfortable and at times frightening. However, you are not alone on this journey of understanding. Welcome to the Shadow Band podcast, and welcome home.
We are back on the Shadow Band podcast, and today we have a very special guest, somebody that I've been following for quite some time. He's definitely made his rounds on the podcast circuit. He has his own platforms as well, but today we're joined by the infamous Crrow777. Crow, how you doing today, bud?
Good. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I appreciate you coming on and giving me some of your time. Before I get into too deep into some of the questions I have for you and all that, if you want, take a couple minutes just to kind of introduce yourself to my listeners, because I don't know who knows you and who doesn't that listens. But if you want to take it, go ahead. The floor is yours, bud.
All right. At this point, if you want to catch up with what I'm doing or anything Crrow777 related, you go to Crrow777radio.com. As everybody knows, the censorship is out of hand. So I basically put bumpers or short clips up on places like YouTube, and I've centralized everything on my own private website, and I serve everything off my own server. I don't use any social media to serve the podcast. Also, I'm working on getting back in front of an observatory class telescope. I hope that will shake out before winter gets behind us, and that would mean I would also be adding telescope video like I used to from One Honkin' Big Scope on my site, Crrow777 Radio. You can find me on YouTube, Crrow777, and Rose and Jason, who helped me run all this, have a Facebook thing they deal with because I won't touch Facebook, and that's about it.
Cool. Excellent. Yeah, anybody listening, make sure you guys go and check him out. Some really interesting stuff that Crow has to offer for us.
There's one more thing.
Yep.
If you subscribe at Crrow777 Radio as a recurring member, Jason put together a 2-hour film, which has won 8 laurels now, believe it or not. When we first put out the film, no one would touch it. But the mind has shifted in this world, and a lot of people are into what we're laying down. It covers probably 75 or 80% of all the interesting telescope things that I shot. The movie is called Shoot the Moon. It's on Vimeo on demand. I think Jason has it set for like a $7 rental, but if you're a recurring member of the podcast, you get a free movie key. I got to try to remember to do that each time.
Yeah, excellent. And I got the day off, so when we get off of this meeting here, I'm definitely going to jump on that, because I have heard you mention that, and I definitely want to watch it for sure.
So shoot me and Rose an email and ask Rose for a free movie key.
Ooh, look at that. I get special treatment, guys. Woo! Cool, man. So there's a few questions I want to get into, and I've heard you talk about a lot of this in other podcast shows and things like that. But for my listeners, I want to really introduce them to you and the things that you've discovered over the years. But the first thing that I wanted to kind of touch on is the famous lunar wave. I have talked about it a couple of times briefly on my show. I've shown my co-host to kind of blow their minds with a few different ideas and things like that. But could you give us like a summary and a recap of the lunar wave situation?
Okay, so what you're referring to is a thing that I shot through an 8-inch telescope on accident, right on the actual true equinox, fall equinox in September of 2012. I held on to the video for a year, and people kept saying, open up social media. I was a webmaster at the time. I knew where social media was going. I didn't want to do it. I finally said, okay. And so in the fall of 2013, I posted the lunar wave clip, and all hell broke loose. I mean, like, you can't imagine. A month from the posting of that, the flat earth movement picked up steam, and that clip got heavily associated with all those people challenging where it is we exist. It basically looks like two crisp rolling waves that roll across the moon. But here's the thing. Back in the day, I was pretty convinced it was tied to the equinoxes in some way and that it was centric to the moon. Neither of those two things is true. What we know now is that if it was going to get renamed, a better name, a more descriptive name, would be the firmament wave. I am now convinced it's a wave in the firmament, and it can be seen minimally anywhere across the ecliptic, or the path of the sun and the moon in the sky, so-called planets. It's been shot 2 or 3 times in front of Jupiter. It's been shot in front of Saturn, which tells us that probably anywhere in the firmament this wave could be detected if there was something backlighting, like a so-called planet or the moon.
Yeah, that's really
I
interesting.
shot that 5 times, by the way. There's a guy who shot it 6 times. It's been filmed more times than we can count, and all 5 of my shots and 2 other shots from a guy in Houston named Randy are in the film Shoot the Moon.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so anybody who wants to see that, definitely check out that film, because it is, when I first saw that, it kind of blew my mind. There was a time about a year ago where I would have called myself a flat earther. I had David Weiss on the show, and that helped kind of push that idea for me personally. Now I wouldn't consider myself a flat earther, I guess, but I don't think things are what they tell us. I like to joke and say space is fake, right?
Well, that's, you're getting into, see, this is part of the problem with the mindset the internet propagates. Just to be clear, I'm not a flat earther, but I'll tell you what, with every frickin' penny I have in my pocket, I support the flat earth community. They're doing exactly what adult human beings need to do. Challenge these things that we've been told, you can't challenge that. It's already settled science and all this other nonsense. No, it's not. When this first happened, on the tail of the lunar wave, and I knew I was going to be associated with it because the clips I was shooting were all over that community. I didn't know what to make of it, but I knew that damn near everything we look at is misdescribed. So I took one big honking telephoto lens and I shot across roughly 10 miles on actually the perfect day, and I realized within an instant that the curvature model is a lie, a provable lie. So to get onto that, then we get to the space idea. When people begin to realize, hey man, we don't even know what our continent looks like, never mind an accurate map of this world, which by the way, in a little while I can prove to you, that every map of this world you've ever seen is wrong. But the space idea, and I don't know if you're about to get there, it's one of the things, I think in 2016, I made the announcement, and ironically, a guy named Brian Mullen, who almost lost his livelihood as an engineer, on the same day I did, we unknowingly both announced that space would probably be better described as a liquid. But calling space fake, it doesn't do what it needs to do. You're telling people we've been told a lie, which is true, but to call it fake implies that it doesn't exist. And it surely does exist. It's just that what we've been told about it is nonsense from space agencies, that their main mission in life is to ensure we know nothing about what's above our head, or for that matter, the place we're walking.
For sure. Yeah. And when I do use like I said, I kind of use it jokingly, space is fake or whatever. But when I say that in my show, I usually do go into a little bit more depth of what I mean. And what I do mean is what you're saying, that what we're told isn't the truth. And, like the narrative isn't so, you know what I mean? And I do try to push home on that, but I definitely see what you're saying. So maybe I should try to figure out a better way to, get that idea across to the listeners.
There it is. As a podcaster, it ends up being a minute case of words matter. What I use a lot is misdescribed, because that tells it the way it is. You've been told this thing and it's not correct. There's a few things. Like I was faced with a problem where I began to realize all my telescope work, if I said the word astrology, all the astronomers started throwing rocks. If I said the word astronomy, all the astrologers started throwing rocks. So I realized here's this language with all this baggage, and we need both of those groups to meet in the middle and discover what is correct, what is true. So I started calling it the sky clock, and that caught on pretty quickly. because it does what it needs to do. It describes something about what we're looking at, and it removes all the baggage that has been attached to certain words.
Yeah, for sure. And sky clock is another term that I throw around a lot. In fact, I just recorded an episode last night with Micah Dank. Not sure if you're familiar with him and his astrotheology presentation. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, I throw around the sky clock idea quite a bit as well, and that kind of leads me to something else that I kind of wanted to touch on with you, the idea of intelligent design or creation. Of course, there's a lot of people out there that believe that we're an accident and the whole universe is an accident. And I used to be one of those people personally. I used to really love Neil deGrasse Tyson and the cosmos, and like I was super into it until I started shattering those paradigms. And now I'm definitely leaning much, much heavier into intelligent design, not necessarily organized religion, but the idea that some god or architect of some sort has created the sky clock and everything else that we can see in our realities. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's not arguable in my view. And by the way, I came from a similar place that you did. I used to think that my path in life was before me, regardless of what I did, and I shifted. And unfortunately, I'd come up in a religion where the men in black stand up at the front of the room and they tell you the same stories over and over and over, never really understanding what's actually in that book, which relates one to one with the sky clock, with the creation. There's just use the right word so people can think. When we say nature or the sky clock, this is all the creation. But if we begin to logically break down the idea and the concept you've laid on the table, it gets to a point where it's no longer deniable. Now, if you go to science, and which is a bit of a religion now, by the way, if you go against something science has said, you'll be drummed out of town, and that's not science. But the point is science is only getting about a third of the game. They can't weigh it or measure it or observe it. It doesn't exist. And I'm sorry to tell you, there are many things that exist in this world, and they should already know it because they make cell phones, which puts a signal that you can't barely detect. Can't see it, can't weigh it. You can detect it, but there are many more things about the place we live that are maybe spiritually correct. But here's the thing. We live in a system. Can anyone deny that we live in a system? Systems are created. If you go out and you do a simple thing like look at an orchid bee, here's an example. So here's an orchid bee, and here's this orchid. It's a rare orchid that blooms once a year for a day. The orchid bee comes, he goes in, and he's forced to go into the flower in a way that fits his body perfectly. And when he backs out, the orchid deposits a pack of pollen on his back. So there's a symbiosis there. But you see, the problem is without the orchid bee, the orchid can't exist. And without the orchid bee can't exist. And that may not be the best example because clearly an orchid bee could find other orchids, but there are examples like the so-called Bodhi tree, the fig tree that supposedly the Buddha found enlightenment. There's another case where they don't propagate without the interaction of a specific insect. I think it's called a gall wasp. Point is there it is. What came first, the chicken or the egg? If you logically look at the question, what came first, the chicken or the egg, it's making a conundrum, but it's resolvable. There's two possible answers. Either there were always chickens and eggs, or the chicken and the egg came to be at the same time. There is no other possibility. And so what we begin to understand is that this has to be a so-called creation.
Mm.
And there's really no other option. You can choose to believe things you want, but if you logically and carefully think about a thing with the main goal of trying to find something that is correct, then all these other assumptions we've been told our whole life, it's like the paradigms you just shattered. You believed in these things until you stopped believing in them and started challenging them. As soon as you challenge, those paradigms shatter. And when you shatter enough paradigms, you get much closer to an existence that matters, that it's not just a fantasy-based existence.
Yeah, 100%. And I push that a lot with some of my friends and my girlfriend as well. You got to shatter paradigms to create new ones, and then when you create the new ones, I think I've heard you say this a number of times. It's like knowing versus belief, right, or something along those lines. That belief is kind of like a wall. This is what I take from it, anyways. That you know, a blind belief or a blind faith in something, especially things like scientism, right? Puts up a wall to where you're not able to think for yourself or question the reality, like you were saying. So that's
Right.
very
Belief is in fact the enemy of knowing, and people get upset a lot when they hear that because they think I'm taking a shot at their spiritual point of view, which is not correct at all. What I'm pointing out in belief is the enemy of knowing is, would you rather believe things or know things? You see, belief is a strange thing peculiar to humans where we just decide one day, usually without any investigation, that we now accept this, we're bringing it on board. The problem with that is for a lot of people, unbelieving things is nigh on impossible, certainly very difficult. And so when we shape a whole lifetime of believing in this because someone told me, or believing in that because I wanted to, knowing is nowhere in sight. And so what it comes down to is, if you're correct, you're just being lucky. But human beings don't have to be lucky to know things. We can throw belief out the window and say consciously that I would like to know things. And I'm to the point where I just use the word accept now. There are many things that I currently accept, but I'll tell you what, next week I might accept none of them. Let me see something that shatters a thing that I currently accept, and that thing's gone. I will move on to the next thing because I don't want to live my life as a fantasy-based reality, never have amounted to anything that matters.
Yeah, 100%. And I say that a lot on this show as well. You know, I'll go off on a tangent about some, you know, call it a theory or whatever the case is, and then I'll say at the end, you know, ask me next week what I think about it, you know, and it'd be completely different. And I think that that's important in today's world, especially with this encroachment of this new world religion of scientism. Um, you know, that you're able to not only question what is being told to you, but question your own beliefs, your own knowings, right? To be able to shatter your own paradigms every once in a while. I think that's really important for people.
Well, we've reached this bizarre point where you can see things, anyone can see things that are clearly not correct. Like, how is it that the entirety of the medical community is perfectly okay with having people breathe their exhaust fumes all day with a face
Mhm.
diaper on? You know, it
Yep.
wasn't too long ago, the early 1900s, the average man or woman understood, because of religious traditions, that your breath is your spirit. Now, if you know anything about alchemy, you know that's true. Your breath is your spirit. So every second of every day, you are renewing your spirit in the creation or the environment or the nature that you exist in. And yet we have a medical community that is just perfectly fine with having people literally choke on their own exhaust fumes all day. This is a place that cannot go on, where we have reached. What's let it go on is fear. Everyone is afraid to be the person to stand up and say, this is not correct and I'm not down with it. A few are, and a few more are getting to that point. But look how many people will simply breathe their own exhaust fumes all day because they're worried about going against the grain. And what that shows us is that what is right and what is wrong is no longer the measure for that mind, because an adult human mind that knows something is not correct will not go there and will do whatever it can to prevent having to go there. And so here we are in this kind of limbo that we currently exist.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And just to kind of run off that for a little bit here, you know, the 6 feet apart situation, and I've said this a million times, you know, uh, that there's something really important to the heart's toroidal field and it being 6 feet apart. And, you know, there's like these different, I don't really like to use the word satanic because I think that it's a cop out to distract you from Saturnism, but there's like satanic worship where they stand 6 feet apart and wear masks and things like this. So, it's really interesting that we're kind of watching in real time, not just with that example, but a million other examples. It's like the wiping away of the last religion, right? Wiping away of Christianity to indoctrinate people into the new transhuman agenda. You have any thoughts on transhumanism at all?
Yeah, I mean, that's clearly where things are likely to be pushed. Whether we get there, whether we have breakaway communities that want nothing to do with it, that all remains to be seen. But I wanted to mention, what did you open up with there? Jeez, I'm losing my thread.
No, that's okay. Like the toroidal fields,
Oh
the
yeah,
heart.
yeah, yeah. So the
Yeah.
6 feet under. So there's all kinds of dark connotations. 6 feet is also what everyone says for a dead person. 6 feet under. If there's anyone out there listening that didn't understand that the popularity of The Walking Dead and the zombie genre is just mocking what they were about to do to society, then think about what these implementations actually mean. All these people willing to be 6 feet apart from each other. You might as well be a zombie, breathing their own exhaust fumes, their spirit not being refreshed day after day after day. That is the allegory of The Walking Dead, the zombie, all these movies, which people think are just entertainment. They're much more than entertainment. And by the way, they're a poke in your eye. They're showing what they're going for in one way, shape, or form, and then they do it. If you ever watch another movie and you don't understand that that is where culture is created in this world that we live in now. We don't have these things that we learned in nature, like they're a throwbacks, a quinceanera or a bar or bat mitzvah. Those were based on nature. Guess what? This child's been alive for 12 cycles, every station of the sky clock. Now they're ready to be called an adult. They're age 13. That's been wiped away, though some vestiges are held on. My point being, that portion of culture was derived from the creation and can be shown to be a valuable, true allegory for that particular culture. What we have now is completely divorced from nature or the creation. The one place where we can go to find no lie and understand that this is true as true can be is separated from our culture creation. So now what culture ends up being for vast amounts of this world is I like some TV shows and I like some movies. And so if you can't draw the line that the Marvel movies, they might have been great entertainment, but that was not the main purpose. They needed the good entertainment to get you in the seat and to pay the ticket or simply just watch it. The priming of culture is what was actually going on there. And these things are obvious on the face of it once you look back and you begin to see how is it that coming up to 2020, all these shows where there's empty cities and empty stadiums, how did they know in less than a year there were going to be empty stadiums and all the sly use of face coverings? And, you can see what's going on here. And that is a system that is unhealthy and is basically not our friend.
Yeah, 100% predictive programming. That's the term I like to use when they do this. And that kind of brings me to another thing. I hate to give some what's the word I'm looking for? I'd hate to give like praise or endorse Netflix in any way, but if anybody still has Netflix, there's a show that just came out called Oats Studios. And the pilot episode of that, if you watch that with your new eyes, you will see all of the predictive programming. And it looks great, like you were saying. It's beautiful. The CGI and all that, it looks wonderful. But on the underlying message, there's reptilians, there's the black goo, there's the transhumanism, there's all of that. And the whole time I was watching that pilot episode, I kept looking at my girlfriend every 5 minutes and I was like, dude, dude, because you see things different once you have the eyes to see them. So definitely true.
Right. At some point, you begin to come into your adult mind and you begin to realize that you can't unsee anything in this world. So you start to be more guarded with what you allow yourself to see. And this is the other thing. I'm in a generation that got pummeled in the 60s. I'm the tail end of what they called the baby boomers. They got their butts kicked in the 60s and they're getting their butt kicked at the end of their life. That one generation is the epicenter of so much world change that it's almost unimaginable. But if you go back to the point where you used to just consume all this stuff, what was going on there is you had been indoctrinated into hypermaterialism. All your values were, when's the next Dune come out? When, these things that I look forward to, but they have no intrinsic value and they add nothing per se to a lifetime. And so it becomes literally entertainment. And we've broken down the idea that words have meaning. So the word entertainment tells you on its face what it's about. Enter, to go in, tain, to hold, meant. Meant is always mind. In every word you see, govern, meant. to control your mind, entertainment to go in and hold your mind. And these truths were not lost on the people who are pulling the strings at the highest levels. But unfortunately, we got to a point where school really doesn't teach much anymore. And so you've got to go teach yourself. And if you start to tune in that words do have meaning, and what is the value of, I'm really excited to see this movie Dune, but why? What is the value of it? You start to, I don't know, maybe insulate yourself is the word, a little bit against what's going on. In other words, to be completely emotionally invested in these things is to open yourself up to the programming. That's my point of view.
Yeah, and word magic is really fascinating stuff. Just the word spelling in itself tells you everything you need to know
It's magic.
about the word magic. Yeah, it's super incredible. I need to do a whole episode on that one day. Maybe I'll get you back on in a couple months and we can go deeper into that.
I used to do a thing, you tell people you were taught to spell just at the lowest possible level anyone could be taught to spell. And, it is magic. And people say, no, it's not. Language is magic, and I can prove it. I'm going to put something in your mind right now. And since I'm not a corrupt individual, it won't hurt you, but you can't stop me. You ready?
Sure.
Blue ball. I just put a blue ball in your mind. It didn't exist. I conjured it up out of thin air. I put a spell on it, which is called language or a sentence, and I projected at you, and something like 80 or 90% of people will actually get an image of a blue ball in their mind. And when you start to take that apart, now you look differently at what the news or some movie is doing.
Yeah, 100%. And like I was saying, when you have new eyes to see things, you can watch anything and see the underlying message, or at least get a glimpse of the underlying message. And in my personal opinion, because people ask me all the time, like, don't you get tired of the conspiracy stuff, and doesn't it bother you, and this and that? And I'm, no, man, because now I can watch a movie and I can appreciate its visual effects, but I can also get the underlying meaning. So it's really like I'm watching two movies at the same time. And for me, it's empowering, but it's just a more interesting way for me to consume this quote unquote entertainment. You know what I'm saying?
Right, and there's, that's a catch-22. So you see some of the underlying encoding on the face of it, but is that something of value that you want to see? Because you're not unseeing it once you saw it.
Yeah.
There are movies, like I did a breakdown of that old John Travolta movie called Michael to show people how important the sky clock is. It's completely an allegory for the sun, the entire movie. Not just the sun in a year through each of the 12 stations, but the sun in the large cycle, where each sign lasts, 2,160 years or something like that. I've forgotten. An age, basically an age. It's all there. And so to see through to that has value. You're learning something about the sky clock that these other people thought was so important they needed to put it in the movie. But the flip side of that is go ahead and take apart the underlying messages and things like The Walking Dead or a vampire movie. It's ghoulish. It adds no value. And so this becomes the problem. At this point, I feel fortunate because I'm an old guy and I'm not going to go get HBO Plus and all these other things just so I can see where Marvel goes. But the truth is, in my 20s, I probably would have wanted to do those things. And so I've kind of freed myself up in that regard. But you can see where all this is going. They're actually going to get people to pay hardcore for the programming they receive, and they're going to ask for it by name.
Yeah, 100%. And that's something that I think I need to start walking myself back from. I've been telling myself that for a few months, to kind of step back a little bit. Even though I feel like I can see through the veil to some degree, I still feel that I do need to kind of step away from it. Because I think you're right. I think there is some other, whatever it is that's going on.
I can draw a picture there. So it's about the source, right? This is another thing that we all get fooled into. Well, they told me a lie last week, but this might be true. How do we get to such infantile levels of reasoning? Last week, the news told me a lie that was a magnitude 10. And this week, I'm still parked in front of the news thinking, well, that was last week. What you have learned from that magnitude 10 lie is this source is untrustworthy. Never trust it again. That's what an adult mind does. And so the real problem here is, and we've done episodes on it, like a television. Does everybody understand that the Hertz rating on the back of a television tells you how many times that image is blinking in your face? Televisions are getting up into the hundreds of hertz. And by the way, why is it called Hertz? That's a dude's name, but words have meaning and we know what it means to be hurt. When I was young, they called it cycles per second. During this kind of heavy fall descent we've come through, they decided cycles per second, which was actually descriptive and useful, was no longer good, so we would start hurting people with hertz. That's just one aspect. There's your delivery system for all these things that people are going to look at. Now let's talk about the frequency of the music. Now let's think about the colors, many of which do not occur in nature. There's a system here that has been systematically designed to take over your mind and put you in almost a dream state. As a matter of fact, there have been studies done from televisions, habitual television watchers, within something like 10 minutes, their brain waves go to the same brain waves as someone who's on Vicodin. So
Wow.
even you think you're aware, which you may well be, but you're not immune to hertz and frequency rates and color patterns and flickering and all these clever little things that have been done, not to mention the subconscious stuff, which your conscious mind has no hope of ever picking up on. That's why it's called subconscious. They got caught back in the 70s testing in movie theaters. There's a movie running. Back in the day, 24 frames per second. That's how many times it's blinking in your face. But our minds have been fooled. There's no motion there. It's a bunch of still images, but our mind thinks we're looking at motion. There's the first time you've been fooled. So you're sitting there thinking you're watching motion when you're in fact not. And they slipped a picture of a penis in one frame every 24 times. And then they regulated the audience and saw that they were sexually aroused. There's not a member in that audience that realized a penis was hitting them every second, but the result was still there, proving that the subconscious mind picked up on these things. And so there comes a level of knowing where, look what's going on in the world. Can you possibly imagine that that kind of power is not being directed at this particular moment in time? And these are the realities. And, you know, seeing with new eyes, maybe you should say seeing with real eyes would be a better way to frame that. Don't forget, if you got lied to by NASA that we went to the moon and you know damn well we didn't, why would you ever listen or accept another single thing? The magnitude of that lie is above any other lie pretty much that you can show. And yet we still tune in. Oh, look what NASA's doing. They're fake putting someone on Mars. They're fake doing this. They're fake going to space. It's all, you know, just saying.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and that's definitely something for me to think about. I think the way that you just broke it down will help me a little bit back away from the tell-eye vision. You know what I mean? So, yeah, it's super interesting. Something else I wanted to bring up to you, the electric universe idea, and kind of to branch off of that, you know, the Saturn worship stuff. Do you have any insight or any thoughts on that whole concept?
Sure. What happens online is something gets popular, and if that thing wasn't 100% correct, it gets more weight than it deserves. I personally accept from years of research that there is only one force. It's called electricity. And the daughter of that force is magnetism. That's it. All this other stuff is just scientism wrapped up in Einstein or something else, some other made up character of fame. So the electric universe, I like the base of the idea, but then they turn around, they use the NASA model for planets and orbits. No, sorry, man. I already know
Right.
what NASA is, and you can take your orbit and stick it in a pipe and smoke it, boys. Not buying. So there's the problem. And what was the last half of that?
Like the Saturn worship, Saturnalia.
So this is another problem. So people all over the world that are coming online are hating on Saturn. And that's a bit like taking all the trees in the world and saying these ones that have this really peculiar red leaf, I hate those. I wish we could just go around the world and pull out every tree that looks like this out. And it's not a helpful or a realistic view. It's one thing to know a force or an energy is being leveraged against you. But look at it this way, maybe. What do we learn when we take white sunlight and put it through a prism? that there are 7 other, basically it's usually divided as 7 other colors. In other words, all the colors in our visual spectrum, when added together, become white, which is well represented in sunlight, right? All the old traditions had 7 planets because they weren't seeing or apparently knowing about the outermost. And so when you begin to put all this together, what you see is there's a holistic system. And in the same way, each color represents holistic, all the colors. And in the same way, all the planets represent holistic energies. What we see is people latch on to Saturn, whose color I think is black. So there's all this full spectrum, and they're just walking around with black cubes on their heads, doing things that we don't care for. And so that means Saturn is bad. Well, no, it does not. It means that these people are off the rails and they're not using the entirety of this creation. The energies of Saturn in a very high-minded, elevated time would be bliss. No one would even recognize it because of the happiness. But unfortunately, we're at a very low level right now, and you could describe Saturn as the cruel taskmaster. Get this right, or I'm going to rap you on the knuckles every 5 seconds until you do get it right. So the problem becomes is that in the same way these people have latched on to the Saturnian portion of a holistic existence and jammed it down everyone's throat, everyone is then taking a part of the creation and hating on it. So these are the problems that I see. There really in nature is no good or bad. It's true. There's polarity, there's negative polarity and positive polarity, but that is not good or bad. It's like a battery. Is the negative side of a battery bad? Doesn't work without that. In the same way our creation doesn't work with that. In the same way on this plane, feminine is a negative polarity, male is positive, but you go up to the next level, that reverses. And women on the spiritual plane become positive and men negative. The point here is that this is complex, and if you're going to accept that the creation is your environment, then how do you pick portions to hate on? Every kind of bird that is here was put here for a reason. Every kind of human being served a purpose, or they wouldn't have been in a system like this that is basically perfect from our point of view. And so we have to get beyond this kind of polarity game where you like this, but you don't like that. Oh, did you see this? You like that. Oh, look over there. If there's something you cannot like, you got to get beyond that. Because when you go to the Serengeti Plain and the lion is killing that zebra, there is no evil being done. Lions require meat. Zebras were put there to help feed them. It's cruel for a human being because we don't have to live that way. But at that level of existence, that is not evil. That is not good. That is someone getting fed so that they can continue to live. And we just have broken away from the obvious aspects. Up here on the plane of human intelligence, fortunately, we've moved beyond having to be quite so brutal all the time, but look at the other ways that brutality is brought to us, like face masks and vaccines, which are certainly damaging. I'm just saying, you've got to recognize the whole and then experience it for what it is and not let your emotion get the best of you, because the moment emotion comes into the equation, spells will be cast. One of the required things to have spells and magic, black magic, is high states of emotion.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting that, because I do talk about like the I call them the parasite class and how they've kind of perverted or inverted the natural state of things, I suppose, and utilized things like Saturn worship for their own nefarious reasons. But then I also kind of push on that it could just be some grand psyop done or whatever. But the way that you've explained is definitely a much more eloquent way of explaining what the unintelligent one, am not able to explain. So that was awesome.
If we all got together and voted Saturn out of the existence, we'd have a hole, and that hole could not be filled in any other way. It exists to do what it does. And in the same way, I think most people associate the color black with Saturn. It's cold and damp. Most people describe it in a similar way, but they forget that in a supposed golden age, you'll hear this all the time. Saturn was our sun. in the
The
golden
first
age.
sun, the
Yeah,
original sun, right?
what's being communicated is if you grew up and you didn't have any more growing to do, Saturn would be the most blissful, great thing you could ever experience, that kind of energy. So what's really the problem here? Is Saturn the problem, or are we the problem, if you want to be real about it?
Right. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it for sure. And to kind of run off of the polarity idea, I heard you mention this. Or I think Greg Carlwood on the Higher Side Chats asked you about like the idea of the nodes between the sun and the moon.
Mm,
Um, and at the time, I don't remember when that came out, a while ago, I believe.
long time ago.
Yeah, yeah. At the time, you had said that you didn't do too much digging into the Vedic idea of that. Have you done any more research on that? Do you have any more insight on like the nodes idea?
Sure, I had done more than I was going to let on back then, but I'm not an expert. And so if I don't feel like I'm well versed, I'm not going to talk about it too much. It's not helpful to anyone to have me come up and guess at things that I'm not even sure of myself.
Hmm.
But what I can tell you for sure, which I proved outright to myself in August, I think it was, of 2017, when that first full solar eclipse in a long time came to our country, is that the moon plays no role in a solar eclipse. It's provable. And that, again, shows you what scientism is doing. How is it that people who are supposed to test and ensure things are real are still accepting that the moon is causing that when the moon is not causing that? If you go back to the old Vedic or Hindu ideas, which are some of the oldest holders of information on things like eons, long periods of time, Kali Yugas, these types of things, they will tell you that it's what we call the nodes. They call it Ketu and Rahu, or other places call it the head and the tail of the dragon. And we view it as an imaginary place where the plane of one orbit crosses the plane of another orbit. But I'm here to tell you, it is that node which is blacking out the sun. And this is not a guess. You can prove this. It took me years of filming every kind of eclipse I could get. And then finally realizing something's wrong here. So I'm going to concentrate on solar eclipse, and I'm going to do one single thing. I've amassed all this technology, all these good cameras, big telescopes, filter devices, full spectrum devices. I'm going to set out to do a single thing. I'm going to film the moon as it approaches the sun to black it out. Now, logically, this should be a simple thing. So we're going to be told the sun is 93 million miles away. It's the brightest thing we're aware of. So at 93 million miles, the brightest light we know is going to backlight a thing that we're being told is just over 250,000 miles away, called the moon. So that backlit moon should easily be detectable coming into the eclipse. You can't do it. And what's ironic is NASA actually has this narrative that there's this one special kind of eclipse when the angles are, EMC squared or whatever the hell they're going to tell you, that you can detect it, and yet there's no photographic evidence. And so I set out with all this equipment. I did light obliteration, filters, full spectrum, everything you could do to simply image the moon coming into the eclipse, and you cannot do it. And that's when I realized, when I finally got that last shot in 2017 during the full eclipse, that it's not the moon. The moon is not causing that. And what makes it worse is, back in the day when I first started to challenge this, probably around, I don't know, 2014 or 15, I was studying the sun, and I had been a roadie. So I knew something about lighting, because roadies have to do stage lighting. And I knew, for example, that if you take a spotlight and you put it on a person, that they will cast a shadow on the wall, but if I move the spotlight closer, the shadow will grow. I know this of directional spotlights. There's another kind of light called an infinite light source. What's unique about an infinite light source is if you put the light source on a person and cast the shadow on the wall, regardless of where you move the light source, the shadow will remain the same size. Now, back in the day, you used to easily be able to look up that the sun is, in fact, an infinite light source. You can't do it so easily anymore, and I know why. Because there were a number of us going at this, and it slowly became more difficult to simply look up, is the sun an infinite light source? Which it is, I assure you. What that tells us is that whatever is blacking out the sun, in the 2017 version, they claimed, and I can't vet this, but they claimed that the shadow of that object was 70 some miles across. If that is true, then the object that blacked out the sun was 70 some miles across, indisputably provable. There it is. There's so many little things that we can all learn about and go out and test to get a more realistic view and truly become the apex life form here that we were always intended to be before we took this fall that we've been engaged in.
Yeah, wow, that's wild stuff, man. And like you said, you're not using an iPhone to film these things. You have some of what I would imagine is some of the most professional equipment you can get your hands on. And
for an amateur, it was good stuff. You know, I had 11-inch scope, I had an 8-inch scope. I had converted a camera to full spectrum. Yeah, I had good tools for an amateur. It's nowhere near what an observatory can do, and that further blows your mind. So check this out. One time, my wife and I were driving from California to Rhode Island. We stop in Flagstaff to get on that big, what is it, 27-inch scope, the one that discovered Pluto, I think.
mm-hmm.
And we're all, cool, man, we're going to get to look through a historic old school 27-inch scope. We go in there and they got it parked on a crater on the moon. And so there were like 15, 20 of us. We all looked, and so we're all, cool, let's look again. So we all looked a couple times. Then we look at the dude, what else can we see? And he said, nothing. This is what we're looking at tonight. I said, come on, we've all seen this object. Can't we look at some other cool stuff? He said, no, it doesn't work that way. At an observatory, you have to put in your focusing plan and get approved for what you want to look at. And if you want to move it, you got to get permission. And on it goes, which leads me to where I'm trying to go, to an observatory class scope where I look at whatever I want. And if I think something might be interesting, I'll talk about it. I don't care what the textbook says or anything else. As a matter of fact, I don't care if I end up being silly and I find out about it. I'll say, sorry, I was wrong. I got up to bat and I struck out. My bad. Let me try again. Maybe I'll hit it this time. There's the big difference in our world.
Yeah, 100%. And that's really interesting as well. The gatekeepers always have the key to, doing whatever it is, even if it's just turning your telescope to another object. I didn't know that.
Funding, services, and money. That's how it's done. This is all going to come down to what's going on now, to services, isn't it? You want to fly on my plane? You can't make a plane. We make the planes. Do you know how to make a plane? No, you don't, do you? Well, we've got the planes, and here's what you need to do to use our planes. The problem with this is that every law known to man shows that that's not a legal way to treat everybody. But the truth of it is we're leaving behind governance like we once knew, and corporation is becoming the new governance. So it's going to be about services, isn't it? You want to use that grocery store? Do you have your own grocery store? Can you stock your own grocery store? Because if you can't, you got to use our grocery store. And here's the rules for using our grocery store. That's what's being pressed against us. What it comes down to is two things: currency, so-called currency, what we call money, and services. And that's also the reason why they've handed out all this free money, because if you've looked around recently, you'll understand that plumbers can't find anyone to help. So it's getting increasingly more difficult for someone to call a plumber when they need a plumber, because that service now has issues. No labor force, they can only do so much. And so why are the people no longer wanting work? Well, because when they were young, they got addicted to Halo. That's part of it. So they'd rather sit home and play Halo all day, but the government's giving out all this free money. You could just sit home on your ass and get by on a shoestring, but you get to play Halo all day or whatever it is you want to do. And so here we are at this kind of crossroads where we're about to see what's going to shake out and what so-called society as a whole will put up with.
Yeah, 100%.
Is it easier to roll up your sleeve, or is it easier just to do what you're told?
Yeah. Oh, trust me, I'm all about it. I just, shared something yesterday, me working hard on a roof with my partner, and like, hey, we're out here making sure you get your free stuff. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
it's crazy out there. And to kind of run off of like the people just accepting, what's being done. I know you've had Matt Landman on your show. I actually have an interview scheduled with him in the not too distant future.
Yeah,
could you touch a little bit on maybe what I could expect from Matt? Because I'm very familiar with chemtrails. I watch them every day. I live 20 minutes from NASA here in Florida, so I see them using the sky as their laboratory, as they've been quoted saying. You have any thoughts on the chemtrails?
Yeah, it's been going on. When I first started filming them, not too long after the end of the 90s, no one No one would believe me. You could actually show them a sprayer turning on and off. No one was buying. By the time I was more known, up in the early 2000s, people still weren't buying. And every time I posted platoons of trolls would come in. But I knew it was pretty clear what they were doing. And this is part of the problem. Why will a person say, no, I know what you're asking me to do is not right, I'm not doing that, or simply say, it's just easier, let me roll up my sleeve here? Well, this relates. What are they spraying up there? By the way, what's in the tap water? How many gallons of fluoride have I drank in my life? Because everybody knows that was used to make people docile and a bit dull-minded. How many times have I gone to the grocery store and bought the worst things? Lord knows what's in them. This plays into what we're talking about. But the air is a big part of it. I know people who are in the know who will claim that all of us are full of, they like to call them nanoparticles, and there's nothing you're doing about it. The point is you're going to have Matt. He'll tell you. He's very active in doing things. For me, in some ways, I've branched into other avenues, and the real problem is, are you going to be a person who picks this one thing that's bothering you and really concentrate on it, or are you going to be more like me, where you go across wide spectrums trying to show that it all relates to the same basic principle?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's my train of thought as well. I talk about a lot of different topics on this show. The first, I don't know, 10 episodes was basically me just getting my co-host, who's my cousin, and her husband kind of on my level, right? Because I've always been known as like the conspiracy theorist and that kind of thing. And not that they were completely unaware of things, but they definitely weren't as deep in the hole. So the first 10 episodes of this show were just kind of me spitting out every different kind of theory that's out there. Some of them aren't theories, some of them are facts, like chemtrails and stuff. But now at this point, they're definitely more in line of thinking with me. They send me stuff that would seem very, I don't know the word, I can't think of the word, but they'll send me something like, oh, this looks and sounds great, but they're seeing the underlying messages and stuff as well. So it kind of makes me feel good to feel like, hey, I'm helping somebody that I love kind of wake up to some of the things that are happening.
Well, think of even how the people who accuse you of being a conspiracy theorist have been trained to try to shut down a mind who's simply questioning. And to be fair, there are people that take it way too far, and they're rabbit hole jumpers, or truly what you would think of as conspiracy theorists. But most of the people that get that moniker these days are simply challenging things because they know things are not on the up and up. And so the people who come in and throw that word around are doing the work of the people that they probably wouldn't approve of.
Yeah, 100%. And I've been guilty of going a little too deep and speculating a little too much myself. I'm not afraid to admit that. I still do it to this day sometimes, just for, shits and giggles, you know what I mean? But there is a lot of truths out there that are labeled conspiracy theories, and it's definitely interesting. So something else that you had mentioned earlier that I was actually gonna bring up to you was the maps being wrong, of the land masses and things like that. Could you elaborate a little bit
Sure.
on that?
So for people who haven't kind of paid attention to constellations and the sky clock and why the sky clock matters, go back to, I don't know, like the 1800s. Look at all those fancy maps, and you'll notice almost every one of them has the following. In every corner, there's a beautiful illustration. Each one of those illustrations is a season: spring, winter, fall, so on, in the four corners. There's an equator, usually going across what they call the southern and the northern hemisphere. So usually there's two world circles representing the map, but the equator, there's a line through the middle, right? And the path of the sun, which will be the S-curving line up and down, up above and below the equator. But above the equator is the Tropic of Cancer. Below the equator is the Tropic of Capricorn. Here's how far we are from reality. And this proves so many things that'll blow your mind if you think about it. How did we get the Tropic of Cancer? What does that even mean? So I'm going to explain to you why we have it and what it means. There are solstices and equinoxes in our world. So we're going to focus in on solstices. What they represent is the high point of the sun in the course of a year and the low point of the sun. So in June, around the 21st, is the summer solstice, the high point of the sun. Everybody knows it's hot, right? Because the sun's at its high point. Then when we get down Christmas or the 21st of December, that's the low point. That happens in Capricorn. But here's the problem. And neither of those two things has happened in Cancer Capricorn for like thousands of years. Currently, we should have the Tropic of Gemini up top for the high point and the Tropic of Sagittarius, I think, on the low point. And I know I'm close. I don't know if I should have refined what I said there, but we're right in that ballpark anyhow, if you look at the actual sky that's above our head. What people have been convinced to do, that a lot of people in astrology, is to calculate back from what used to be correct. I'm not even kidding. Like if you go look at what the zodiacal signs, if someone's actually thinks they're a Virgo, they're probably a Leo, if you actually look at the real sign above their head. And this creates a problem. A lot of tropical astrologers, who, by the way, gave us damn near everything we know about astrology, the definitions, what things mean, the traditions, that came from tropical mostly in this part of the world. They won't have anything to do with a sidereal astrologer who's simply looking at what's actually above the head. And this is like astrology and astronomy all over again. These people need to come together. The knowledge they both hold is invaluable, but it needs to mesh back together. And people need to work out what is actually correct here. Why are we calculating for a time that's been gone for centuries, if not millennia? And why in the hell were our maps never updated so that the tropic is the correct tropic? Currently, I think we would be in Gemini. I'm working this out in my mind. I haven't looked at it for a little bit. And the low point, or the winter solstice at Christmas, would be in Sagittarius. So we should have, I think, a tropic of Gemini and Sagittarius. And that tells you one heck of a lot if you take the time to focus. That means the long game has been going on so long, and that the information sources were so thoroughly taken over at some point that maps quit getting updated. And that proves beyond doubt that, first of all, you don't even know what the shape of your continent is, which you could prove anyhow. Go get a Gatekeepers, go get all the projections of maps you can get online, set them next to each other, and then ask the simple question, why don't all the continents look the same? If they're all different, they're all wrong. That's the logical assumption. The moment we supposedly went to space and took a picture back at the world, the problem of what a continent should look like on a map was solved, if you want to be honest about it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's all that.
Yeah, and I've seen that a lot too, where you just have these inconsistencies with these supposed images of Earth from space, of the sizes of the continents, but also like the
Color, everything.
The clone clouds, all that stuff.
We know the name of one of the artists who did one of the more recent versions of the so-called blue marble image, and he's on the record admitting NASA gave me data, so I made this pretty picture of what I thought the world should look like.
Right. Yeah, I think we spoke about that with David Weiss when he was on as well. So yeah, it's super interesting. Yeah. Well, I mean, I have a billion other questions that I could ask you, but I'm sure you've got things to do, and I don't want to keep you here all day. But maybe one day in the future we can get you back on and have another discussion about some of the other things that I wanted to talk about. If that's all right with you. But for the last couple minutes here, I know you did at the beginning, but if you want to just reiterate where, my listeners can find you and all that, please let everybody know.
Okay, first of all, Jeff, I'm happy to come on if I have the time. And if you contact Rose, she puts me where I need to be and keeps track of everything for me, because I just got too many things. People can find me at Crrow777radio.com. That's Crrow777radio.com. So basically the word crow with 2 R's in it. And before everyone gets excited, that's a play on my kind of birth slave name, my incorporated name. That's why there's 2 R's in the word crow. So Crrow777radio.com is slowly beginning to house everything that I produce. And as I get back into telescope work, hopefully soon, it will be no different. It will all be served from my own server. I'm not playing the censorship game anymore. I'm not harming anyone. I would never knowingly harm someone. And yet I can't even post content. And so the logical answer to that is get a privately held server and serve all your own stuff. The problem with that is, like all services, they cost money, right? That's how come we all get trapped. We need those services, but we don't have enough money not to have the services. But there it is, basically Crrow777radio.com. And again, the movie Shoot the Moon is on Vimeo on demand. It's a great movie. It's won 8 awards. Last award it won was from Jaipur, India, I think. I think they appreciated the Vedic stuff about the what's it called?
The nodes.
Yeah, the nodes. Sorry, I couldn't get there. But that's on Vimeo on demand, and if you're a recurring member of the podcast, you just get free movie keys.
Cool, man. Absolutely. And I know you had said that you'd give me a free key, but listen, you've done a lot for me personally as far as helping me expand my own mind on a lot of these things. So I have no quarrels with, pitching in and becoming one of those subscribers to your channel. So definitely going to do that. I implore anybody else to do that. This guy has so much knowledge and information that it really will blow your mind. We really just kind of scratched the surface here today. But yeah, Crow, I really appreciate your time, my friend. This was a great conversation, and I really do look forward to maybe doing this again one day. And until that time, man, be safe out there, be free out there, and keep doing you, man. A lot of people are tuning into you, and you're definitely helping the world, I think. So.
Well, I appreciate it. If I have the time, I'm happy to do things. I've kind of dedicated 724 to putting information out in any way I can while we're in such dire straits. But, all cycles come to an end, as will this one. At some point, all this kind of brutality and lawlessness will come back in check. Sanity will come back to itself, I like to say. We just got to get to that point, And
Yep.
One of the main problems in the world right now is we've been taught that if I see someone else getting their butt kicked, God, I'm glad it's not me. I can deal with them getting their butt kicked. I just don't want it to be me. But we're so short-sighted that we can't see if that person's being mistreated, I can be mistreated and probably will be mistreated if nothing is done to stop the mistreatment. So we got to come together. We got to not be divided all the time. Astronomers, astrologers, come together. What's the harm of it? Why do we throw rocks at each other? We've been trained to damage our own progress. We're all living and breathing. We all bleed red blood. We all have children. We want to do better. We need to come together and look out for one another, because this crap going on in the world, it's got to come to an end here.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. Everybody take that to heart. So, well, anyways, Crow, thanks again, man. I'm sure we'll talk in the near future. And like I said, be safe and be free out there, brother.
Cheers. Thanks so much.
Absolutely.